Welcome and thank you for standing by. Currently, all participants are in a listen-only mode. Today's webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be posted publicly. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. Now I'd like to turn the call over to one of your presenters for today, Caleb Hopler.
Thank you, Lisa. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Caleb Hopler, and I'm a supervisory survey statistician. And joining me today is Joseph Booth, supervisory IT specialist. We are both with the American Community Survey Office at the U.S. Census Bureau. Today, we're going to further our understanding of American Community Survey, or ACS, data in the Application Programming Interface, or API. We're going to do this by sharing tips and tricks. So I'd like to remind you that today's webinar is being recorded. If you would like to follow along with our webinar today, we have posted the slides online. The slides are available at the link that you see at the bottom of the slide, and my colleague will also be dropping the link in the chat here in WebEx in just a moment. A recording and transcript will be posted on our website within the next few weeks at the same link. And if you have any questions during the webinar, please post them in the Q&A section of WebEx. One of our team members will try their best to respond to you as quickly as possible during the webinar. Before we talk about the ACS and the API, let's start with a quick overview of the U.S. Census Bureau as a whole. The Census Bureau is the largest of 13 primary federal government statistical agencies. Our mission is to serve as the nation's leading provider of quality data about its people and economy. We strive to provide the most up-to-date, useful, quality data and products. While most people are familiar with the decennial census, we also conduct more than 130 censuses and surveys of households and businesses across the nation each year. This includes the American Community Survey and more than 30 other household surveys. There are also over 60 economic programs. Of these, the economic census is the largest and most comprehensive. There's also information on our nation's public sector provided by the Census of Governments. So today, I'm going to discuss the Census Bureau Data API. I'll get into the basics of the ACS, first as overviews, then I will move into navigating the Census Data API. That's when when I conclude that, I'll pass it over to my colleague Joseph for back and forth between slides with information and resources, then live demos of tips and tricks. Then I'll take it over for resources to learn more beyond this presentation today, and then we'll conclude the webinar. So first of all, what is the API? The Census Bureau Data Application Programming Interface, or API, is a data service which enables Census Bureau programs to provide data in a standardized way and to be hosted from a central location. The API gives software and web developers the ability to create and easily update custom applications, and the API also allows data scientists to have more direct access to data to conduct analyses. Also gives data users like you an opportunity to explore our data, including older ACS data that's not found on data.census.gov. An API is built and conducted through the URL when you're making an API call, and this is done in your web browser. We'll also, so there's many different data sets within the Census Bureau API. We'll be focusing on the ACS data set today, but you can find more information about the full Census Bureau data sets in the API in the link at the bottom of this screen. So the American Community Survey, or ACS, is the premier source of detailed information about the census, about the nation's people and housing. The survey samples approximately 3.5 million addresses each year. These data are collected continuously throughout the year to produce annual social, economic, housing, and demographic estimates for communities throughout the United States and Puerto Rico. The estimates cover more than 40 topics. The ACS collects this detailed information each year that was previously collected by the decennial census each decade. Information from the ACS generates data that help inform how trillions of dollars in federal funds are distributed each year, supporting more than 300 known federal uses and countless non-federal uses. ACS data are timely because they are released the year immediately following the year in which they are collected. The ACS creates period estimates, which means they represent the characteristics of the population and housing over a specific data collection period. The ACS releases estimates for 1 year and 5-year periods. After years of extensive testing, the ACS was fully implemented in 2005. The first ACS 1-year estimates were collected in 2005 and then released in 2006. And the first 5-year ACS estimates were collected between 2005 and 2009 and then released in 2010. So I said that it started in 2005. We're now in 2025. A nice tidbit for you all today is that we are now in the 20th year of the ACS. Now, the content collected by the ACS, and which can be found in the API, can be grouped into 4 main types of characteristics: social, economic, demographic, and housing. Social characteristics include topics like education, language spoken at home, and veteran status. Economic characteristics like commuting to work, employment status, income. We have demographic characteristics like age, sex, race, Hispanic origin, and also housing characteristics. I'm reading from the list, topics like computer and internet use, housing costs. But I also want to highlight we have new topics added in 2025: the electric vehicles, solar panels, and public sewer connectivity. Data for these new topics are going to be, are planned to be released in 2026. But these topics are used to produce more than 1,000 tables for local communities each year. Now, along with the numerous topics covered, the ACS also provides data for more geographies on an annual basis than any other household survey. So in this visualization, you can see that the smallest geographic building block is the block group, and that includes between 600 and 3,000 people each. The ACS's unique ability to report on a wide range of geographies is what gives it such a broad appeal, and partly what makes the ACS API so valuable. So earlier I mentioned the different products the ACS provides: the 1-year, we also have 1-year supplemental, and the 5-year estimate. So ACS 1-year estimates, which combine data collected over 12 months, are available for geographic areas with a population of 65,000 or more. ACS 1-year supplemental estimates are a subset of detailed tables that are available for geographic areas with populations of 20,000 or more. Now, these 1-year supplemental estimates are simplified versions of popular ACS tables, and they do provide the most current data to almost twice as many geographies compared to the standard 1-year release. The ACS 5-year estimates, which combine data collected over 60 months, are available for geographies of all sizes, down to those granular census tracts and block group levels. Now, the full detailed data release schedule for each year is available on the link you see in the bottom of this slide. Before we move on with building an API call through the URL, let me take a quick step back to go over some concepts. So first is the concept of groups. Groups is inclusive of both tables and profiles. From now on in this webinar, if I use the term group or groups, plural, I'm referring to tables and profiles. So within the ACS API, there are the data sets of 1-year, 1-year supplemental, and 5-year APIs. Within those are the group types. The letters in parentheses next to the tables here and the profiles correspond to the beginning of the table ID, which will be important later when we are building our API calls. The most important thing to note is that only detailed tables, shown on the left here, are available at the block group level. And on the right, we have data profiles that provide a plethora of data. It's broad social, economic, housing, and demographic data within these profiles. And comparison profiles offer comparisons of these data across ACS years. Now, these are the ACS data groups that you can find in the API. In data.census.gov, The second column here is what the table ID starts with. So for instance, B or C denotes detailed tables, DP is for data profiles, etc. As you can see from the third column, each table or profile gets its own endpoint, forming the base for the API call. I'll get into this soon, but first let's navigate the API and break down the decision points. We have lots of resources and places to start when accessing ACS data in the API. Today, I'm going to start with the API discovery tool, which is a directory of sorts and starts with api.census.gov as the URL. Now, building this URL, choosing data, selecting the year of interest and ACS in the URL, I land at this page at the URL at the bottom of the screen that you can see here. So for my section on navigating the Census Data API, I'll be following this page from left to right. This is commonly used by developers for guidance on building their API queries. Then I'll explain the components of an API query. Now, the first 5 columns are title, description, vintage, which means the reference year of the data, dataset name, and then dataset type. Title and description outline the different data sets available in the ACS for that reference year, which is highlighted under the vintage column. In this case, we are looking under the 2023 vintage. Now, to change years, simply change the year piece in the URL. So FYI, if you try vintage year 2020, that will not be available since those are experimental estimates. Those can be found through our website at census.gov/ACS. Now, dataset name shares the code variable used for that dataset, while dataset type shares an insight as to whether the dataset is aggregate, meaning from the full sample that is used in making the pre-tabulated data tables and profiles, or microdata. And that's meaning that it's a subsample of responses that can be used to create custom estimates and custom tables. So for instance, we're looking at the first row here. We have ACS 1-year detailed tables. And so detailed tables are the most detailed of any table or profile that ACS offers, and also provides data down to the most granular level at the block group. The next 3 columns are geography list, variable list, and group list. Geography list gives you the geography summary levels or geographic hierarchy, along with their geography level codes. This is a great way to see what geography levels in general are available for that data product type. Variable list is a list of all the variables possible for all of the tables or profiles found within that data product. Now, this page, when you click on it, can get quite long and therefore may take a while to load sometimes. But it is a great way to quickly find that variable that is right for you. Once when the page is loaded, you can do a Control F for a search on that page. You can also search for variables by individual table or profile under the group list, which will load faster because they are smaller pages. My colleague Joseph will get into this later. Now, group list is a list of all the tables or profiles under that data product. This page shows the table or profile ID, the title of the table or profile, and a variable list for each individual table or profile. So in the API, as a reminder, tables and profiles are lumped together under a single category called groups. Now you can actually ignore the sort list column. This will come up as empty. This is not used for the ACS API, only for other Census Bureau API products. Now the last 3 columns are examples, developer documentation, and API base URL. Examples give you example URLs at all different geography levels available for that group type. This right here is a strong tip for all data users, and especially those who are not programmers and do need help building an API call. Pull one of these examples, and you just need to update a few existing components within that URL to grab the data that you want. We'll do a demonstration of that later. But the documentation links under developer documentation all take you to the same page where you can find resources to help you with the API in general. And then the API base URL provides you with the base URL that you will start with for that product type. So let me jump into the next slide here to discuss the API base URL in more detail. The base URL is different depending on the table or profile type. So before adding variables in the geographies, the base URL consists of the year, ACS dataset, and either ACS1 for 1 year, ACS SE for supplemental estimates, or ACS5 for the 5-year estimates before adding the table or profile type. Now, shortly, I will show how to build an API call using a data profile, which has an endpoint of /profile, as you see in row 2 of either the 1-year or 5-year table here on the screen. After you put the beginning of the call, then it'll get followed by $get, the variables, and the geographies. But again, I'll show that momentarily. So you may be thinking to yourself, okay, I get it. Each type of table has its own special endpoint. So what? Well, the reason why this is so important is because when you're using the ACS API, you have to take into account the type of table or profile that you are using. So I alluded to this earlier when I was talking about the API discovery tool, but now I'm going into detail. So for example, if you are using DP05, which is a data profile, and table B27001, which is a detailed table, you're not going to be able to use one API call to get both of these tables. That's because these are different types of data sets. You're going to have to use 2 different calls. One is a query for the DP05 table using its own special endpoint for data profiles. And then you'll run another separate query for B27001 using its own special endpoint. If you don't do this and you try to get both tables in the same query, then you're going to get an error message like we see in the top image. So then you need to separate them out. Now, if, on the other hand, you are using tables DP05 and DP03, which are both both data profiles, then you'll be fine using one query because they both use the same special endpoint. So to drive my point a little further, let me show the slide again, but I'm going to share a helpful tip. When you have an API call, which remember is just a URL, and you want to switch between product types, check the API base URL to make sure that you are switching correctly. So for instance, if you have an API call with a few variables under the group B27001 here, which would be a detailed tables data set, and then you want to build a new API call for other variables within group DP05, which would be under the data profiles data set, you wouldn't just update the variable component and the table ID component of the API call, but you'd also update the dataset component from ACS1 to ACS1/profile. But don't worry, we're going to go over this soon with visual aids. So first, let's visualize this. Here on the left, we see 2 API variable IDs, B17001_002E, and then B17001_002M. So there are 3 elements to an API variable ID for ACS variables: the table ID, the line or row number, and the annotation. So B17001 is the table ID, which in this case is for poverty status in the past 12 months by sex by age. On this table screenshot to the right here, you can see the table ID outlined in red on the top left. Now we can tell this is a detailed table from the B at the beginning of the table ID. After the table ID, I have an underscore, and this is where we see the row number, in this case 002. This tells us what row number we are pulling from the table. Each ACS variable in the API has a specific row number that shows where it fits in the table. Row number 2 in this table is the population with income in the past 12 months below the poverty level. This is shown in the bottom box outlined in red. And finally, we have the annotation, which tells us which part of the variable we are seeing. When we have the variable ending in E, we are asking for the estimate. In this case, the estimate, the number of people with income in the past 12 months below poverty level. The E tells us to pull the variable for the estimate column. We could also get the margin of error by asking for the same variable, but replacing the E with an M, which tells the API to grab the variable from the margin of error column. We can see these column headings in the middle box outlined in red. Now, there are more annotations available in other ACS data products, such as the data profiles. For one example, there could be an annotation like P for percent estimates. So we can actually explore this table. If you were to go at the link at the bottom of the screen, explore this table more at your leisure later, you are welcome to do that, and then switch between API and see how that views in comparison. Now let's start building the API call. So using the guidance from the API discovery tool I was showcasing earlier from left to right, you can put together a request for data, which is creating a URL or a call to the data. So to start, no matter what the data set is, start every request with api.census.gov/data. This is the census data API. Then add the year and the data set. So in this case, we are using 2023 ACS 5-year data profile data set. After defining the year and data set, you will always begin defining the variables and geographies you want by starting with $get equals. This specifies which variables you want the API to give you. Then you actually add in the variables. So you can include up to 50 variables in a single API query separated by commas. So in this data set, the variable called name provides the name of the geographic area or areas that you are using to limit your search. For a full list of variables, remember you can go to the variable list within the API discovery tool. Now make sure that the categorical variables, such as name, group, etc., are placed next to the regular variables. And this is such as the DP04_0046PE you see on the screen. Now, this example is pulling the percent estimate, PE, for row 0046 in the data profile DP04. For the 2023, this data point is the percent of owner-occupied units. Then add in the predicate clause to specify how variables should be filtered or limited. For example, for certain geographic areas. Then you'll add your selected geography, or plural geographies. And for a full list of geographic levels, you can also review the API discovery tool. When you hit the enter key to run the API call, it will return the data in JSON format. And you can also choose HTML or XML, but I'll have Joseph share that later. So here from this request, the output is in a JSON format that stands for JavaScript Object Notation. And using statistical software like SAS or R, you can edit the commands to grab larger sets of the data, to manipulate the data to display in a table format or as a chart or graph or in an interactive map. You can also add labels to your variables to make it easier to read and understand. So whereas name that I showed earlier gives you the geographic labels, adding ampersand descriptive equals true at the end of the API call gives you a variable label in row 2. So this is optional, of course, but I highly recommend it so you can, one, confirm that you are understanding what data you are grabbing in the API, and two, to also confirm that you are grabbing the right data point that you actually want. Okay, so a lot of the basics and overview of navigating the ACS API. Let's turn it over to Joseph for some tips and tricks and some live demos. Joseph, it's all yours.
Hey there, Caleb. Thank you so much, man. That was a lot of great information, and let's jump into some tips and tricks. So today I'm going to take a few minutes. I'm going to walk you through some stuff we've put together for you here for working with the Census Bureau's API. I have like many of you, hopefully, have taken the API courses that are available through the Census Bureau, and that's how I taught myself the API. I come from the perspective of a developer versus a statistician or a data scientist. So my goal here today is to show you some practical things that'll help you navigate the API more efficiently and find the data you need without getting lost in the weeds. I'll start by running through these slides and we'll set the stage. Once I've done that, I'll jump over into the browser and give you a live demo. I'm going to be moving fairly quickly. We have 5 demos that we're going to try and get through, and we've got 30 minutes. So let's get started. So one of the first things to understand is how the Census API is organized. Caleb touched on this a bit, but I want to highlight it again because it's foundational. The API has a set of root endpoints that serve as the entryway into the various data sets. And here you can see that we have data versions available in HTML, JSON, and XML. So when you hit these base URLs, you're going to get a list of data sets available to you in these file formats. So for ACS, our API structure is in this format. So you have the root API, you have a year variable, which can be any year from 2005 all the way to 2023. And just a note, if you are looking for data from 2005 to 2010, it is only available in the API. So you have to use the API to access that data. So for this, you'll substitute a year value and a dataset value. That dataset value can be either ACS1 or ACS5. So throughout my demo, I'm going to always come back to this particular root endpoint. It's going to be our home base, just for a little bit of consistency throughout the demonstration. And this is something, this endpoint that we're going to take a look at, it's something that can trip you up a little bit. It's slightly different than some of the other endpoints that we're going to take a look at. And what we're going to see is the ability to jump in between HTML and JSON to take a look at how the data differs based on the file format that you choose. So HTML, that is obviously formatted for us humans, and JSON is a great format. Humans can read it as well, but it is a great format for accessing data programmatically. And I'm going to show you both of these during the demo so you can see what changes and what stays the same. So the next point is really important if you're working with the API programmatically. When you're using the ACS detail tables endpoint, for example, the ACS 1 year with detail tables, you're gonna see that the JSON object that's returned contains multiple data sets. So if you hit that endpoint, you're gonna see more than just the detail tables metadata. So we're also going to take a look at another data set so that you can see the difference. But the big takeaway here is that not all of the endpoints behave the same. So you have to be cautious. Caleb showed this twice in his slides. You know, those data products that you append right before you start actually building your query is very important. So if you're in detail tables, you need to make sure you have the detail table endpoint. If you're in comparison profiles, you want to make sure you're in that endpoint, and so on. So let us take a look at what we just talked about. So I'm going to switch over to my browser, and I'm going to type in on my address bar api.census.gov/data/ now this is the year variable. This could be any year from 2005 to 2023. 2024 will be released later this year. We have the ACS survey, right? And then we are interested in the data set of ACS1, and I'm going to append HTML here. So this is going to focus this page on all of the data sets that are available for 2023. So I'm scrolling the page here. There are a total of 8 data sets here, And as Caleb pointed out, you have all the endpoints in the far right column available to you. So what we're going to do here is switch over. So you see here, we have this endpoint. It's for detail tables. And then here's the comparison profiles here. Let's take a look at these two here. I'm going to switch this over to .json real quick and see how this looks. So I'm going to switch HTML to JSON, and we see this is the object that comes back. Here's where the endpoint is, ACS1. We see that this is the ACS 1-year detail tables. And then I'm going to zoom back out here. You'll notice if I keep scrolling down, there's more data sets. So here's data profiles. I'm going to scroll down again. We've got the comparison profiles here. So all of the data sets that we see on the .html page are also listed in the JSON response. So if you're calling this endpoint in code, you need to manage that response so that you don't accidentally process all these additional URLs. You may get some weird errors during processing that you might have trouble tracking down. Check your object that's returned. So I'm going to quickly switch this over to comparison profiles. So after ACS1, I'm going to append a /C profile. And we're going to take a look at the .html first. And the first thing we notice here is that there is just a single row that is returned. So we can focus directly on this data product, this comparison profile. And if I throw it over into JSON, our object, here we go, we have comparison profile here. But when I scroll, there's only one object in this endpoint. So for all of the objects other than the detailed table, for all the JSON endpoints, I'm sorry, you're only going to get just the single element returned in your call. So if you're hitting that programmatically, you need to definitely be aware of that. All right, let me flip back over to our presentation here. So the next thing we're going to do is take a look at the examples endpoint. This section is incredibly helpful when you're first learning how to construct API calls. There's lots of different sample requests for different geographic levels. You can target state, county, tracks. It's a great place to get a feel for how to format your queries. And a quick heads up, if you are making over 500 calls per day, you will need to register for an API key, and you'll see in the example links that are provided at the endpoint that it has a placeholder for the key. Just know if you're making 500 calls or more, you're going to need to apply for a key. That is free, and it is through the developer section of the website. So one of the things that I struggled with when I was first learning this was being able to identify for your predicates, what is a required predicate that requires a value, and what allows you a wildcard. And the wildcard is represented with a star in the API. So some endpoints let you use wildcards to grab everything under a geographic level, while others require very precise values. And that behavior is not obvious when you're first starting to work with this. You may take an example URL. You're going to modify it based on some response that you've received, and you may also wonder why it's not working. This is a common scenario. This is a situation that happens frequently when you're learning because there's some nuances to this API. It is not an API like you might have used in other commercial settings where a lot of the variables are just tacked onto the end of a single API endpoint. We have lots of different endpoints. So I'm going to walk you through an example of this live so you can kind of see what happens. So let's go back over here to our browser. And as you can see, I am still here on our endpoint. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm on the detailed tables row. I'm going to click examples. And I'm going to take a look at the county here. And you can see we have an example. We're going to look at table B01001, and this is the variable. This is going to be row 1 for E. And I'm going to click on this, and you can see here, this is where you would add your key if you're doing over 500 requests or not. So I'm going to click on this and open up the endpoint. And you see we get this list of every single county that is in the data set for this variable B01001 underscore 001E, which is one of my favorite variables. So I'm going to do something real quick to modify this. This is very helpful, not only for any humans that might want to know what that variable name is, but also programmatically if you want to be able to add it into your call to get this response so you don't have to make an additional call out to the variable section just to pull a label. So Caleb showed us this. If you append and descriptive, if I can type CRIP, and we set this equal to true, we're going to see when I return, now this variable here, we get a second row with some additional headers, right? And we get the label for that variable. So now I can tell without having to go look this up in a separate call, this is the label for this variable. I'm also going to do one other thing while we're here. I'm going to add in the get section. So in the get function section, you can add geo underscore ID and then comma, and I'm going to hit return on this, and you're going to see this change. And now I have a column that provides what is called the UCGID. This is the Uniform Census Geographic Identifier. And when you're first starting out with the API, it might feel difficult to use this, and you might stick to the county and state predicates or the national predicate or some other predicate that's available. But if you can get comfortable with the UCGID and adding geo underscore ID to your get, this will be very helpful, and I'll demonstrate that in just a little bit. But I just wanted to show you that real quick. So one of the things that you would think you should be able to do, let's take DeKalb County, Alabama here. You would think, okay, I've got this county code, and I'm just gonna change the county from star, and I'm gonna put in this code 049. There we go. And I'm gonna hit enter, and you're gonna see that we do not get what we thought we were supposed to get. It turns out that in order for this to work, you need n equals state, and I believe it was state 1. So there we go. That's how we get our county and state information for DeKalb County, Alabama for that variable, which if I add the and descriptive in, there we go. We get the name. So there we go. That's how you can modify some examples, plus the GeoID, very important, and descriptive equals true. So that's all great and all, you might say. Joseph, I'm not an experienced programmer. I didn't know to do all that. Well, let's take a look at the geographies endpoint. What we're gonna do is we're gonna go back to the root endpoint, and this time we're gonna take a look at the examples endpoint and the geographies endpoint. Both of these are super useful when we're writing code. Again, we're gonna take a look at this geographies endpoint in both HTML and JSON formats. HTML for the humans, JSON for programmatic uses. And why is this important? Well, The HTML version doesn't show you which parts of the predicate are mandatory. So those state predicates or those county predicates, it can be tricky to know that, especially for some of the smaller geographies. So when you flip over to the JSON version, we can actually explore that and take a look at what is required and what can operate as a wildcard. All right. So let's take a look at this. We're going to jump back over to our working endpoint. So I'm just going to remove this here. I'm going to put the .html, and we're going to take a look at the geographies endpoint here, right? And we see the HTML page. You get 4 columns here, but what you don't get is in these geographies, you can see, okay, I got state, county is represented by this geography level, but how do I know which one of these is required and which one is a wildcard when I go to construct my API call? A quick way to see that is to modify your endpoint to JSON, and then we can take a look at this response here. Here we see the national, we see region, we see division, state. These are all pretty straightforward. You can just add those as a predicate with your values or your wildcards. And when we get to county, which we just looked at, we can kind of see the structure of the JSON starts to provide us some information that is useful. It tells us that state is required. So when I tried to look up DeKalb County and I didn't have the state in there, this is why, because it requires the state value. Now, it did work because when we had the wildcard, state defaults so that we can, defaults to a wildcard for some reason, so you can see everything. So that's an important distinction there. So if you are using that as your endpoint to create an additional call, just know that only for the wildcard do you get the state for free. If you define a value for your county, you have to have a state, right? So 049, I had to put the state of 01. And here you can keep scrolling down and you see these are all the required fields. These are your optional wildcards. And this is a good way to quickly just kind of see, oh, hey, this requires a certain value for a field. And here you can see these things are very long. All right, let me jump back over to our presentation here. So one of the other things we're going to take a look at is one of the more data heavy parts here is when you're trying to find variables. So we're going to take a look at the variables and group endpoint, and Caleb did touch on this, but I'm going to take a look at this from more of a developer perspective here. And when you use the variables link from the endpoint here, that especially in detail tables, that page that gets returned is large. It takes a moment to populate, and there are better ways to find variables by using the groups, and we'll take a look at that. All right, so I'm going to use the groups endpoint. I'm going to show you the variable link, and I'm also going to show you the group link, and we'll do a comparison of how fast the pages load and how to find variables in a little bit more efficient way. So jump back over here. I'm going to go to our endpoint here, and I'm just going to modify that and put that back in HTML. All right. And the first thing we're going to do here, we're going to look at the variables lists. So this is going to open up the variables HTML endpoint. And you can see this is a very large list. I'm going to try and scroll it. And you can see it's still right into the page. So you can make a call to this endpoint programmatically. As you've seen, you can easily switch over any endpoint from .json, .xml, or .html. The items that are returned can be quite large. So it's still not finished loading. So I'm gonna go back here and show you from the groups endpoint, this is a little bit more efficient. So let's take a look at E01001, and we're going to take a look at the variables that get returned here. And now we see, here's our label that we saw earlier, right? Now we see this page is much faster to load. I can scroll almost all the way down to the bottom. It is absolutely 100% every variable that is for table B01001. And again, that's the human view. That's our JSON programmatic view. And we can also see that our labels are all available in here. So if you want to build objects in your code and get the labels, they're all right there, right at the endpoint. All right, and let's take a look at, oh, okay. So we've got a few more minutes here. This is going to be our final demo. I'm going to combine some of the tips and tricks here that I shared with you with data.census.gov. And it wasn't clear to me when I first started using this, but data.census.gov is built using the Census API. So all the data that is presented on data.census.gov is all of the data that is inside of the API. So this is a good thing to know because we can actually use data.census.gov as our front end to the API. So we can use the visual cues of the UI to help us isolate API calls that we might want to make to the API to retrieve data. All right, so let's take a look at this here. So first thing we're going to do is I'm going to put this, actually, let's put this back to our endpoint, right? And whoops, I pressed the wrong button there. We hit Control-0. And before I open data.census.gov, I'm going to open up examples. I'm going to pull our county example link again right here. All right. And we're going to add and descriptive equals true. And I'm also going to add our geo_ID comma into the get function. And I'm going to hit return. So I'm going to set this up here for right now. And then we're going to jump over into data.census.gov. All right. And because I have this set up to the variable B01001, we're going to take a look at that table. So let's pull the table up. I'm going to use the tables tab, and here is our table right here. So let's see, what do we have here? Okay, so these are all our counties. So we were looking at DeKalb County. So right now this defaults to the United States. So we're looking at the national level. I'm going to go into geos. Actually, I'm going to move this over here. I'm going to go into geos, and then we're going to search for our county. And then we're going to go into Alabama, and then we're going to select DeKalb County, Alabama. All right, so we have found DeKalb County, Alabama. This is our estimate, 72,569. And we're going to look over here. We have DeKalb County, Alabama, and we can see that we have 72,569. This is our county code, this is our state code, and this is our UCGID. And how can we use this to modify and check out the API? Well, data.census.gov has given us a great little tool here, and it's called API. All you gotta do is click on this. We are going to copy this URL. This should look familiar to you. This is the API call. You can see the year. You can see the data product we're looking at. You can see the table or group. And we also have, what's that? UCGID. All right, let's copy that. And then I'm going to close this, and I'm going to copy and paste this right into our browser. Bam, there we go. Now, this returns quite a bit of stuff. And here's the variable we've been looking at, B01001. So the first part of the call, you've got all of the variable names, which can be quite cryptic, of course, but we have a way to decode those now using and descriptive equals true. And then we see the first value here is the variable we've been looking at. But that's great for DeKalb County, Alabama. What if I want to find some other county? Am I going to have to keep going back in here and clicking through and finding the county? Well, I could, but I've already got the API called. And let's say I wanted to do this programmatically. I've got the UCGID available. Let's take a look at this here real quick. Yeah, what we can do now, imagine you're a software person, or you're a developer of some sort. So this column would be available to you in your code. You can just write code, replace the UCGID, boom, and we're in a whole new county right here. We're in Houston County, Alabama, and you could do that for every single item in this list programmatically. You could retrieve your data and use it however you might want to do. So UCGID is very, very powerful. You can basically, once you get comfortable with that, I'm going to go back up here. All these endpoints where you have all these different predicates, county, subdivision. Now, imagine you had to put this in code. You'd have to have this typed properly. You're going to save it to a variable. You might accidentally mistype. If this ever changes at some point, it becomes a fragile link, but UCGID, that is going to stay locked in for you, and your code will be a lot more robust and durable. All right, Caleb, that was all the tips and tricks I had for today. I really appreciate everyone's time, and good luck out there in the API.
That is great. Thank you so much, Joseph. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. It'll take over there. So yes, again, thank you. That was great. I understand this is a lot of information. I had a lot of information. Joseph had a lot of information, and it's going to be tough to digest all of this today. As a reminder, this presentation is going to be available at the link where you registered for the webinar today. It'll be available, the recording, the transcript, the slides, etc., within the next couple of weeks here. You can review it later, but let me also share resources for learning more so you can digest this information of the ACS and the API on at your own pace. So if you want more in-depth information on the ACS resources, we do have an introductory webinar on the ACS with slides and recording available. An updated intro webinar will actually be given next month on August 20th. So be sure to keep an eye out on our communications for this. We also have a course titled Discovering the American Community Survey. It's 6 modules long, comprehensive course designed for all kinds of data users, and also just those that need to understand the fundamentals of the ACS and how to access the data. The developers page located at census.gov/developers is where you want to start for all things API. Here you can find technical documentation, get support through our Slack channel, sign up for an API key, and most importantly, see what is available through our available APIs section. Now, the purpose of this webinar was to provide you with tips and tricks with using the ACS API and to have this as a recorded resource for you to refer to later. If you would like a more interactive, hands-on approach, we encourage you to check out our workshops, such as the basics of using the Census API workshop. There's currently openings for the August 6th to sign up, and we will post more workshops as they come available. And also just yesterday, the Census Bureau published a new video tutorial on using the API. Provides an example walkthrough of building an API call from start to finish. I highly recommend checking this out. This webinar today has a lot of information, and this video tutorial pieces it together nicely. So before we wrap up today's webinar, I'd like to invite you to stay in touch with us. And one great way is for telling us how you use data from the ACS. So have you or your organization perhaps used the ACS to make an important decision, or maybe help your community, expand your business, etc.? So if you have, please share your ACS story with us. We'd love to know and then explore how data enthusiasts across the country are using ACS data in creative ways. Doing so provides further support for the importance of the data we collect here at the Census Bureau, and it's a great way to further promote our data. Also consider joining a group we have specifically for users of ACS data, known simply as the ACS Data Users Group. It's a group with a website. It's an online community with over 7,000 members. You can share messages, materials, and announcements related to the survey. Membership is free and it's open to all interested ACS data users. And you can also sign up for and also manage email updates from the ACS. Our monthly events and updates email will alert you when new materials are available, and you'll also be able to stay up to date on our data releases. So in closing, I want to share information on how to get answers and support for after this webinar. First, you can start at our website, census.gov/ACS. The ACS website contains a wealth of information that should answer most of your questions. But if you still have data user questions after that, then of course you can reach out to us by phone or email at acso.users.support@census.gov or 800-923-8282. Now, let me highlight Census Academy real quick. It's our learning hub for data skills. You can learn how to access and use Census Bureau data your way through our how-to data gem videos and in-depth courses, webinars, and tutorials. This includes the Discovering the American Community Survey course, the API workshop, and the new API tutorial that I mentioned earlier. You can follow us on social media at US Census Bureau and using hashtag ACS data. And one last thing before I end the webinar, if you are using ACS estimates, please make sure to source the Census Bureau American Community Survey as to where you received the data. It helps people know that the information that they're using is powered by the ACS. Well, this concludes today's webinar on the tips and tricks for the ACS API. Thank you all so much for joining today, and please have a wonderful day. Lisa, I turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Caleb. This concludes today's webinar. Thank you for your participation. You may disconnect at this time.